Clara Bennett didn't cry when her brother handed her suitcase to a stranger. She had already used up every tear she had left the night before, alone on the kitchen floor of a house that was never truly hers. She picked up that suitcase herself, straightened her back so hard it ached, and walked past every face in Red Hollow without blinking once. They thought they were throwing her away. They had no idea they were setting her free. If this story moves you, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning they sent Clara Bennett out of Red Hollow, the summer heat was already vicious before 8 o'clock. It pressed down on the packed dirt of Main Street like a hand trying to hold something underwater. The kind of heat that made horses restless and tempers short, and people mean in ways they wouldn't bother to regret later. Clara stood beside a freight wagon that smelled of pine resin and old tobacco. She was wearing her second-best dress, the dark blue one with the mended collar, because her best dress was already packed deep inside the single suitcase that sat at her feet. She had packed it herself the night before, alone, by lamplight, folding every piece of clothing with the same careful hands that had once set a Sunday table for two, and now set it for none. She was 27 years old. She had been a wife. She had buried a husband. She had endured 3 years of whispers that started soft and grew into something she couldn't outrun. Now, she was an arrangement. Clara! Her brother Thomas stepped forward through the small crowd that had gathered. Not to wish her well. Clara understood that. They had come to watch. The wagon's loaded. Driver says he wants to leave before the heat gets worse. I'm aware of the heat, Thomas. Don't be difficult. I'm not being difficult. She kept her eyes on the horizon past the edge of town. I'm standing here, aren't I? I'm going, aren't I? Thomas dropped his voice, though it didn't matter. The nearest women were close enough to hear every word, and they knew it, and so did he. It's a good arrangement. Ethan Carter's land is solid ground. You'll have a roof. You'll have work. That's more than I deserve? Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. Thomas's jaw went tight. I didn't say that. He didn't have to. Behind her, she could hear Margaret Hale speaking in that particular carrying whisper that was designed to be overheard. Margaret had been in the same church pew as Clara every Sunday for 6 years, and had brought a casserole to the funeral, and had started the barren rumor within a month of the burial. Poor Thomas, Margaret was saying, to no one in particular, and everyone in general. Carrying that burden all this time. At least now there's a place for her. The Carter Ranch. That was a man's voice. Older. Someone from the feed store. Man's half a hermit. Lives out there alone since his family died. Barely comes to town once a season. Well, Margaret again. Clara could hear the smile in it. At least they'll be good company for each other. 2 broken things. Clara picked up her suitcase. The driver, a weathered man named Sully, who asked no questions and volunteered nothing, took it from her hand and swung it up onto the wagon without a word. She was grateful for that. She climbed up after it. Clara. Thomas was still standing there. He had the look of a man who wanted to say something that would make him feel better about what he was doing, and couldn't find the words for it. She looked down at him from the wagon seat. Take care of Mama's garden, she said. She planted the roses along the east fence. They need water every 2 days in this heat, or they'll die. Thomas blinked. Clara, every 2 days, Thomas. Don't let them die. Sully clicked his tongue at the horses. The wagon rolled. Clara did not look back. She had made that decision before she climbed up, and she kept it the way she kept most decisions, with her jaw set and her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes pointed straight ahead at the road that was taking her away from the only town she had ever lived in, toward a man she had never met, on a ranch she had never seen, to a life that had been decided for her by people who believed they were doing her a favor and were mostly just relieved to have the problem solved. The road west out of Red Hollow cut through flat grassland that rolled in long yellow waves under the summer sky. It was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when you are too tired to be suspicious of them. Clara watched it. She let herself watch it. She had heard the name Ethan Carter exactly 4 times in her life. Once from her late husband Robert, who had mentioned him in passing as one of the old ranch families that had been out here before the town was anything more than a trading post. Once from Thomas, 6 weeks ago, when the arrangement was first proposed in the flat, practical language Thomas used for everything he didn't want to examine too closely. Once from the church ladies, in that whispered conversation she was not supposed to hear, but was absolutely meant to. And once from old Doc Harmon, who had looked at her over the rims of his spectacles in his quiet office and said, carefully, "Carter's a decent man, Clara. He lost people. He keeps to himself. But he's decent." Decent. It was not a word that set the heart on fire, but Clara had learned, in the years since Robert died, that decent was rarer than it looked and worth more than most people gave it credit for. The wagon ride was 4 hours in the climbing heat. Sully stopped once at a creek crossing to water the horses. Clara climbed down, walked to the water's edge, and knelt to splash her face and the back of her neck. The cold was a shock, and then a relief. "You all right, ma'am?" Sully asked. "Fine, thank you. Carter's place is another hour past the ridge." He hesitated. He was not a man built for conversation, but something seemed to be working at him. "He ain't a bad sort, just quiet." "I don't mind quiet," Clara said. Sully nodded once, as if that settled something. They didn't speak again for the rest of the ride. The Carter Ranch sat in a long, shallow valley, ringed on 3 sides by rocky ridgelines that broke the worst of the western wind. Clara saw it first from the top of the rise. The main house, a barn, 2 smaller outbuildings, a scattering of fencing that had clearly been repaired in pieces over many years. There was a garden plot on the south side of the house that was more weeds than vegetables. The fence along the nearest pasture sagged in 2 places. A water trough by the barn had a crack that had been patched with something dark and temporary. She catalogued these things not with judgment, but with the particular eye of a woman who had spent years keeping a house running and had never entirely stopped thinking that way, even after the house was gone. The horses pulling the wagon picked up their pace as they came down the slope, recognizing the smell of the stable. Sully drew them up in the yard. A man came out of the barn. He was tall, taller than she had expected, though she didn't know why she'd expected anything. He wore the kind of tan and wear that came from years of working outside in all weather. His hair was dark, going gray at the edges, cut short with no particular attention to evenness. He moved like a man who was used to a lot of space and wasn't entirely sure what to do with less of it. He stopped about 10 feet from the wagon and looked up at her. Not the way the men in town had looked at her for the past 3 years, with that mixture of pity and uncomfortable distance. He looked at her the way you look at a person you don't yet know anything about, which meant he was the first man in Red Hollow's radius who had managed that in a long time. "You're Clara Bennett," he said. "I am." "Ethan Carter." He didn't offer his hand the way a man might in town. He just said his name like it was information she'd need and nothing more. "You had a long ride." "I did." "You hungry?" "No, thank you." He nodded. He looked at Sully. Appreciated. Sully was already handing down her suitcase. "She travels light," he said, in that tone that suggested he approved. He looked at Clara. "You take care now, ma'am." "Thank you, Sully." The wagon turned and rolled back up the slope. Clara watched it go until she remembered herself and stopped watching it. She turned back to Ethan Carter, who was still standing the same distance away with her suitcase in his hand, watching her with the same expression, measuring, but not unkind. "I'll show you the house," he said. The house was clean, in the way the houses get clean when someone is very tidy and very lonely, and has a lot of time to put things exactly where they belong. Every surface had its object. Every object had its place. There was almost nothing that was there because someone wanted it. No decorations, no small comforts, none of the little evidence of a life being lived with any pleasure. Just order and quiet, and the particular feeling of a space that had been waiting for something, without knowing what. "Room at the end of the hall is yours," Ethan said. He was not a man who cluttered a sentence. "There's a lock on the door if you want it." Clara looked at him. "I won't need it," she said. Something moved briefly across his face. She couldn't name it. He nodded. "Kitchen's yours to manage if you want it. I've been eating plain." "I can cook." "I'm not asking you to earn your keep." "I know you're not." She set her bag down by the hall doorway and turned to face him squarely. "Mr. Carter, I know what kind of arrangement this is. I know what the people in town think about it, and I know what they think about me. I'm not here to cause you trouble. I'm not going to pretend this is something it isn't. But I'm a working woman, and I don't do well sitting still. So I'll cook, and I'll manage the kitchen, and I'll do what I can around the property. And in return, I'd appreciate being treated like a person and not a problem someone handed you." A long pause. "That's fair," Ethan said. "All right then. I start work before sunup. I won't wake you." "I'll be up before you." He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to his face, but it was there for a moment. "There's water in the pitcher in your room," he said. "Supper's around sundown. I'll see to the animals." He walked out. Clara stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked at the window over the dry sink and the thin curtain moving in the small breeze that found its way through the gap in the frame. Outside, she could hear him moving around the yard, the steady, practical sounds of a man doing work that needed doing. She was here. This was real. This was the life that had been handed to her. She took off her travel gloves, rolled up her sleeves, and started heating water for coffee. The first week was careful. They spoke to each other in the functional language of two people sharing a space. Who would need the wagon that afternoon? Whether the rain that was gathering on the northern ridge would reach them before nightfall? What needed to be done about the cracked water trough before it gave out entirely? Clara asked questions that were about the ranch rather than about him. Ethan answered them fully and directly, which told her things about him that a dozen conversations about himself wouldn't have. She found out on the third day that the garden had been his wife's. He didn't say it plainly. He said it the way you say things you've stopped saying plainly, because saying them plainly is its own kind of damage. He was standing near the fence, looking at the tangled beds, and she said she'd like to clear them if he didn't object. And he was quiet for a moment before he said, "It was hers, the garden. Do what you want with it." "Do what you want with it," said the way you hand something over when holding on to it hurts too much, and letting go hurts in a different way, and there isn't a third option. "What did she grow?" Clara asked. A pause. "Tomatoes, beans, some herbs. She tried squash every year, and it never worked, and she tried anyway." A beat. She was stubborn like that. Good kind of stubborn? Something shifted in his voice. Best kind. Clara knelt by the nearest bed and pulled a handful of weeks out by the root. "I'll try the squash," she said. He walked away, but when she looked up 20 minutes later, he was fixing the section of fence nearest to where she was working, without having said he was going to. On the sixth night, the scream came. Clara came awake all at once, hand reaching for the lamp before she was fully conscious. The sound had been sharp and brief. Not danger, but pain. She was in the hallway before she'd thought about it, lamp held out, and nearly collided with Ethan coming the other direction. He had clearly been asleep. He was barefoot, in work trousers, hair uneven. He looked at the lamp in her hand and then at her face. "One of the mares is foaling," he said. "Heard her from the window." "Is it her first?" "Third, but she's been having trouble." He was already heading for the back door. "I'll come." "You don't have to." "I know how to help with a birth," she said. "My father had horses." He stopped. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted from resistance into something more like relief, though she suspected he would not have called it that. "Bring the lamp," he said. They worked side by side in the barn for almost 2 hours. The mare was a big roan named August, and she was having genuine trouble. Foal positioned wrong, everything taking longer than it should. Clara worked alongside Ethan without him having to explain much. She knew the hands-on parts. She'd helped at foaling since she was 10 years old. They didn't talk a great deal. They didn't need to. They moved around the same problem the way two people move around a kitchen when they've cooked together many times. Except they had not, and it was only instinct and necessity. When the foal finally came, wet and dark and shaking with new life, Ethan sat back on his heels and let out a long, slow breath. "She's all right," Clara said. "She's all right," he agreed. August was already turning to nose at the foal, already beginning that ancient conversation between mother and new life. Ethan watched it. Clara watched him watch it. There was something in his face that she had seen before, on men who had lost things and kept coming into contact with reminders without being able to avoid them. He carried it quietly, but it was there. "What are you going to call her?" Clara asked. He looked at the foal for a moment. "I don't know. I used to let my—" He stopped. "You can say it," Clara said quietly. "You don't have to step around everything." He looked at her. A long, considering look. "I used to let my son name them," he said. He liked that job. Clara said nothing. She didn't fill the silence with comfort or questions. She just let it be what it was. Ethan stood up, brushed himself off. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. "Thank you," he said, "for the help. I'm glad she's all right." He picked up the lantern from the hook by the stall door and held it up to light her way back to the house. It was a small gesture, an instinctive one, and Clara thought about it later, lying in a room with the window open to the summer darkness, and decided it was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in a long time. She found the letter on the 12th day. She wasn't looking for it. She was clearing a shelf in the back room, what had once been a small study, she thought, though it was being used now to store gear and tools, and it fell out from between two old ledger books. A single folded sheet, unsealed, with no name on the outside. She picked it up without thinking, and a single line caught her eye before she could put it down. "If you're reading this because I'm gone, then I want you to know I don't blame you." She folded it immediately and put it back exactly where it had been, between the same two ledgers. She stood there for a moment, with her hands pressed flat against the shelf. Then she went back to her work. She didn't mention it to Ethan. She would not have known how to mention it, and it was not hers to mention. But she thought about it as she worked, about the kind of pain that makes a person write something like that and leave it where it might be found, about what it meant to carry something like that for however many years it had been sitting on that shelf. At supper that evening, Ethan said, without looking up from his plate, "You've been quiet today." "I've always been quiet," she said. "Different kind of quiet." She looked at him. He was still looking at his plate, but there was a tension in the line of his shoulders. The particular attention of a man who is listening, even when it looks like he isn't. "I'm fine," she said. "Just thinking." About? About what it takes to keep going when keeping going is hard. He set down his fork. He looked at her for a long moment. "I reckon it takes something different for every person," he said. "What does it take for you?" A pause, long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "Work," he said finally. "Having something that needs doing. Something that would fall apart if I stopped." "The ranch." "The ranch." He picked up his fork again. "And company helps," he added, in the same flat tone he might use to note the weather. "Even when you didn't think it would." Clara looked at her plate. Outside, a night bird called once and was quiet. "It does," she agreed. 2 weeks after Clara arrived, she woke before dawn to find a bowl of wildflowers on the kitchen table. No note, just the flowers, set in a cracked clay mug, sitting in the center of the table where she would see them first thing. She stood there in the early gray light, looking at them for a long moment. They were not fancy flowers. They were the kind that grew without being cultivated along the fence lines and rocky edges of the property. But someone had picked them and set them in water and placed them where she'd find them. She heard the back door close softly, Ethan heading out to start the morning chores. Clara filled the mug with fresh water and moved it to the windowsill where the light would catch it better. Then she started the fire for breakfast. She didn't say anything about the flowers when he came in to eat. Neither did he. They ate in the warm, easy quiet of the early morning, and outside the summer light came up slow and golden over the ridge, and the ranch that had felt like a place Clara had been sent to began, quietly and without announcement, to feel like a place she had arrived at. Not a punishment, not an arrangement, a beginning. She was not yet sure of what, but something in her, something that had been held very tight and very still for 3 years of grief and whisper and endurance, began, at last, to loosen. She did not know what was coming. She did not know what the weeks ahead would bring, or what would arrive at this ranch door in the dark hours of the night and change everything that had been so carefully and quietly beginning. She did not know about the gunshots, or the strangers, or the choice that she and this quiet, wounded man would have to make that would cost them everything and give them something they had never thought to ask for. She only knew that this morning there were wildflowers in the window. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. The wildflowers lasted 4 days before they went pale and soft at the edges, and Clara replaced them without comment, using a different cluster she'd found along the creek bed during her morning walk. Ethan noticed. She could tell by the way he paused in the kitchen doorway on the morning she'd done it. Just a half-second pause, barely anything, before he poured his coffee and sat down to eat. He didn't say a word. Neither did she. But something between them had shifted in those small, wordless exchanges, the way ground shifts before anyone feels the earthquake. Gradual, underground, real. By the end of the 3rd week, Clara had reclaimed the garden. She hadn't planned it as a project. She'd started pulling weeds on a Tuesday morning because the sight of the tangled beds was bothering her, and by Thursday she'd cleared half of it, and by the following Monday the whole plot was turned and ready. Ethan had watched her work without commentary, which she'd come to understand was his version of approval. When she asked him to check the fence along the south edge of the plot, he had it repaired before she finished asking the question. "You didn't have to do that today," she told him at supper. "Nothing else pressing." "There's always something pressing on a ranch." He looked up from his plate. "How'd you know that?" "My father ran cattle for 15 years before his knees gave out." She set her fork down. "I grew up working." I know what a working place looks like, and I know what it looks like when someone's been carrying it alone for too long." A silence. He didn't deny it. "How long has the hired hand been gone?" she asked. "Year and a half. And before that?" "Before that I had 2. He said it flat. No self-pity. "But things got lean after. I let them go." After. She had noticed that word. The way he used it as a door with no handle. After the sickness took his wife and his boy. After the ranch became something he was enduring rather than building. After the person he'd been stopped being someone he recognized. "The place can be what it was," Clara said quietly. "It just needs time and hands." He was quiet for so long that she thought he'd decided not to answer. Then he said, "You sound like you've thought about it." "I have." "Why?" She met his eyes. "Because I'm here, Ethan. And being here matters to me, even if it wasn't supposed to." He looked at her. Something moved through his expression that was too complicated to name. Not quite surprise, not quite gratitude. Something older and more careful than either of those things. "All right," he said finally. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a vow. But coming from him, in that voice, it meant something. Clara picked up her fork again, and the conversation ended. But its weight stayed in the room long after supper was cleared. That night she lay awake in the dark for a long time, listening to the summer sounds outside her window, and thinking about the word after, and what a person builds when the before is gone. She didn't have an answer, but for the first time in years, she found herself wanting one. The trouble with the Alderman brothers started on a Thursday. Clara was in the yard hanging wash when she heard the horses, 3 of them, coming down the ranch road faster than riders come when they mean well. She had the sheet in her hands and she stopped moving. Something in the sound of it, the pace and the carelessness of it, put a cold feeling low in her chest. They rode in like they owned the ground. 2 were young, mid-20s, trail-worn, the kind of lean that isn't healthy. The 3rd was older, with a thick red beard and the eyes of a man who'd stopped worrying about consequences some time ago. The older one pulled up close enough to the yard that his horse's breath reached her. "Woman," he said, not as an address, but as an identification. The way you'd say fence post or water trough. "Carter on the property?" Clara set the sheet carefully in the basket. "Can I ask your business?" "You can ask." He smiled. It didn't improve anything about his face. "Tom." Ethan's voice came from behind Clara, and she heard his boots on the hard ground as he crossed the yard. He'd come from the barn. She hadn't heard him come out, but he was there, and something in the way he placed himself, slightly in front of her, not in an obvious way, just a degree of positioning that she noticed, told her he'd seen these men before. "Carter." The red-bearded man, Tom, shifted his weight in the saddle. "Been a while." "Not long enough." Ethan's voice was level, not aggressive, just flat in the particular way that is its own kind of warning. "What do you want?" "We're riding through. Thought we'd water the horses." "Trough's on the road a mile east. You passed it." "Trough's dry." Tom shrugged with one shoulder. "Thought a neighbor might extend a courtesy." "We're not neighbors." One of the younger ones shifted. His hand moved in a way that Clara catalogued without looking directly at it, and the cold feeling in her chest turned sharp. "Now, Carter," Tom said, his voice taking on a different tone. Softer, slower, more dangerous for it. "We're just asking for water. And I'm just saying no." Ethan didn't raise his voice. "You ride through my property and you keep riding. If your horses need water, there's a creek 2 miles north. You know where it is." Tom looked at Ethan for a long moment. Then his eyes slid to Clara, a long, assessing look that made her want to step backward. But she didn't. She held her ground. And then back to Ethan. "You got a woman," Tom said. "You'd better ride," Ethan said. A pause that lasted 3 full seconds and felt like 3 minutes. Then Tom touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that carried more threat than courtesy, and turned his horse. The 2 younger men followed without a word. Clara stood still until the sound of the horses faded entirely off the property. Then she turned to look at Ethan. His jaw was tight, and he was watching the road with the focused stillness of a man waiting to confirm that a threat has actually left. "Who are they?" she asked. "Alderman brothers. Tom's the oldest. They run cattle across the border. Cattle that doesn't belong to them half the time." He finally looked at her. "You all right?" "I'm fine." She was. Mostly. "Are they going to come back?" He was quiet for a beat. "They work for Crowley. They were scouting." "What does that mean?" "It means Caleb Crowley has been pushing farther east for the last 6 months, and someone told him there's unclaimed graze land past my south fence line." He turned back toward the barn and then stopped. "It means they'll be back. Not today, but they'll be back." Clara watched his back. "What do you do when they come back?" He looked over his shoulder at her. "Same thing I did today." "What if they come when you're not here?" He went very still. Clara picked up her wash basket. "I'm not saying it to frighten you," she said. "I'm saying it because I think we should both know the answer to that question before we need it." He turned around slowly. He looked at her the way he occasionally looked at her, like she was a thing he'd expected to understand, and kept not fully understanding. "Can you shoot?" he asked. "My father's daughter," she said. Something in his face changed. Not softness exactly, but something related to it. "I'll show you where the rifle is kept," he said. "I know where it is," Clara said. "I found it the second day. I was just waiting for you to offer." He stared at her. Then he made a sound that was, not quite a laugh, but the first sound she'd heard from him that was anywhere near one. "All right," he said. "All right." The mini-climax of the week came at 4 in the morning on a Saturday, when the sound of running cattle woke them both at the same moment. Clara had her boots on before she was fully awake. She was out the back door, pulling her hair back with one hand, when Ethan came around the corner of the house, already moving. "South fence," he said. "They're running my cattle through the south boundary." They ran. It was dark. The moon was down, the stars giving just enough light to read the ground by. And when they reached the south pasture, the fence line had been cut, and 40 head of Ethan's cattle were pushing through the gap in a rolling mass of bodies and noise, driven by 2 riders on the far side who were working the edges. Ethan didn't hesitate. He went right, moving through the dark with the sureness of a man who knows every foot of his own land. Clara went left without being told to, because left was the open direction, and she understood cattle. And she understood that if she didn't close off the left flank, they'd lose half the herd into the dark plain before morning. She ran the fence line, shouting and waving until the lead cattle turned, then held her ground against the push of bodies and heat and noise, holding the line the way her father had taught her. Steady, loud, present. The herd slowed. The riders on the far side peeled away and vanished into the dark. When Ethan found her 20 minutes later, she was leaning against the fence post with her hands on her knees, catching her breath. He was breathing hard, too. He looked at her in the dark, just looked, taking stock, making sure she was whole. "The riders got away," he said. "I know. Did we lose any?" 3 head. Rest are turned." She straightened up. Her dress was torn at the hem from a nail she'd caught somewhere in the dark. Her hands were shaking slightly, which was adrenaline and not fear, or mostly not fear. "Crowley," she said. "His men." "What do we do?" "Tonight?" He picked up the wire cutters he'd had in his belt and walked toward the cut fence. "Tonight we fix the fence. In the morning, I'll ride to the Harmon place and send word to the sheriff." "And if the sheriff doesn't come?" He looked at her over his shoulder. "Then we handle it ourselves." They worked side by side in the dark, restringing the fence by feel and by the pale silver cast of the first false dawn beginning far to the east. Neither of them spoke much. The work was its own conversation, efficient, coordinated, the two of them moving around the problem the way they had moved around August's difficult birth, with a wordless competency that had grown out of weeks of shared work and shared space and the slow understanding of each other's rhythms. When the last staple was driven, Ethan straightened up. Clara was already rolling the extra wire. He watched her for a moment. "You should have stayed in the house," he said. "The herd would have scattered in 3 directions if I had." "That's true." A pause. "That's also not why I said it." Clara looked at him. The light was coming up now, slowly, enough to see his face. "I know why you said it," she told him, "and I appreciate it. But I'm not a woman you need to put in a house and protect, Ethan. I'm the woman who's here. That's different." He held her gaze for a long moment. The new light was finding the angles of his face, the tiredness in it, and the something else that lived underneath the tiredness. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." They walked back to the house together, through the early gray light, close enough that their arms brushed twice, and neither of them moved away. The letter arrived from town 9 days after the fence cutting. Sully brought it, made the trip out specifically, which meant whoever had sent it wanted it delivered and not held at the post office for a monthly pickup. Ethan took it from Sully's hand at the door and stood in the yard reading it with a stillness that told Clara everything before he said a word. She waited on the porch. When Sully had gone, she said, "What is it?" Ethan folded the letter. He looked at the middle distance for a moment. "It's from Thomas," he said. Clara went very still. "Your brother," Ethan said, looking at her. "He's written to tell you that your presence at the ranch has become—" He glanced at the letter, then back at her. "A subject of talk in town. He says the Reverend has expressed concern. He says there are people saying that the arrangement has—" He paused, choosing his next words with visible care. "Gone beyond what's proper." Clara stared at him. "He says you should come back to town," Ethan continued. "He says he can find you another placement. A widow in Sutton County needs a housekeeper. He says it would be more suitable." The word landed between them like something thrown. Clara took the letter from his hand. She read it in its entirety, once, carefully. Then she folded it exactly the way it had been folded and handed it back. "No," she said. "Clara, no." She looked at him directly. "Do you want me to go?" He didn't answer immediately, which, she had learned, was not the same as hesitating. "No," he said. "Then I'm not going." She turned back toward the door and then stopped, her hand on the frame. "And if Thomas writes again, you can tell him the same thing I would tell him, that I am 30 miles outside of Red Hollow, and the last time I checked, that puts me out of range of the Reverend's concern and my brother's arrangements." She went inside. Ethan stood in the yard for a long moment, looking at the folded letter in his hand. Then he walked to the fence post at the edge of the yard and pushed it into the gap between 2 boards where the old mail usually went. He didn't write back to Thomas. Clara never asked if he had. It was Ethan who finally said it out loud, 3 days later, standing in the kitchen after supper, when Clara was washing plates, and he was supposedly heading to the barn to check on August's foal. He stopped in the doorway. "I buried my wife and my son on the same day," he said. Clara set down the plate she was holding. "September, 3 years ago," he said. "The fever came through fast. Sarah got it first. Then the boy." He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the floor just past the doorway, the way people look when they're talking to a memory rather than a room. "I couldn't. There was nothing I could do. I knew that. Didn't matter. You still—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "You still go through the thing of trying anyway." Clara turned to face him. She didn't move toward him. She didn't offer what he hadn't asked for. "What was his name?" she asked quietly. A pause. "Daniel." The word was different from every other word he'd said in all the weeks she'd known him, harder and softer at the same time. "He was 4 years old. He liked naming the horses." Clara's throat tightened. She kept her face still and her voice even. "He sounds like he was something." "He was everything." Ethan finally looked up. His eyes were dry, but the dryness was the result of practice rather than the absence of grief. And she could see the difference. I'm not saying this because I want anything from it. I'm saying it because it seemed wrong for you to be here all this time and not know." "Thank you for telling me," Clara said. He nodded once. He started to turn. "Ethan," he stopped. "I lost a child too," she said. It came out smaller than she'd intended, quieter. "Not the way you mean. It was early. A few months in. Right before Robert got sick." She looked at her hands. "The town decided I was barren after Robert died with no living children. That's what they told. They didn't know the rest." The silence in the kitchen was not empty. It was full of the particular fullness that happens when two people show each other the truest and most breakable parts of themselves at the same moment. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. Just that. No filling it in. "So am I," said Clara. "For you and for me both." Outside, the summer dark had settled full, and the stars were enormous, and the ranch was quiet except for the sound of crickets, and somewhere far off, an owl working the night pasture. Ethan didn't go to the barn. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat back down. Clara poured 2 cups of coffee. They sat across from each other in the lamplight for a long time, not talking much, not needing to. Two people who had each thought they were alone in a particular kind of loss, and had just discovered, quietly and without ceremony, that they were not. It was the closest thing to peace that either of them had felt in years. Neither of them noticed the rider who passed the property line in the dark. Slow, deliberate, without a light. Looking. The rider came back the next morning, not alone. Clara was at the well when she heard them. 5 horses this time, not 3. And they came down the ranch road at a deliberate walk that was somehow worse than the speed of the previous visit. Speed could be nerves. This was intention. She left the bucket and walked straight to the house. She had the rifle down from its place and loaded before the first horse cleared the gatepost. She was back on the porch, rifle held at her side and not raised, when Ethan came out of the barn, still pulling on his jacket. He saw the riders. He saw Clara. He saw the rifle. He walked to the porch without hurrying and stood beside her. "You loaded it already," he said quietly. "I didn't figure we had time for the courtesy of loading it in front of them." He almost said something, decided against it, turned to face the riders. There were 5 of them, and Tom Alderman was not among them. These were different men, older, quieter, the kind of quiet that belonged to men who had done enough in their lives that they no longer felt the need to announce themselves. The one at the front had a gray hat and a gray beard, and a way of sitting a horse that said he had spent more of his life in the saddle then out of it. He stopped 10 yards from the porch. "Carter," he said. "You're on my property," Ethan said. "State your business, or turn around." "My name is Vance. I ride for Caleb Crowley." He said the name the way men say the names of people they've decided are beyond argument. Flat and final, like a fence post being driven. "Mr. Crowley has an interest in the land along your south boundary, the unclaimed graze section past your fence line." "That land runs adjacent to my water rights," Ethan said. "Anything upstream of my creek affects my water. Crowley knows that." "Mr.
Crowley is prepared to make a purchase offer."
"Tell Mr. Crowley I'm not selling." Vance looked at him without expression. "He thought you might say that." "Then he already has his answer." He also thought, and here Vance's eyes moved, briefly and deliberately, to Clara, and then back to Ethan, that your circumstances had changed since spring, that you might be more motivated to consider financial arrangements, given the additional responsibility. The air on the porch went very still. Clara felt the weight of what he'd just said settle over her like something physical. They had been watching, long enough to know she was here, long enough to understand what her presence might mean to Ethan, and to decide to use it. Ethan took one step forward off the porch. "Ride back to Crowley," he said, and his voice had dropped to something very low and very clear. "Tell him that what happens on this property is not his concern. Tell him the land isn't for sale, and tell him that the next time he sends men onto my property without an invitation, we're going to have a different kind of conversation." Vance looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were the eyes of a man calculating odds. Then he turned his horse, and the 4 men behind him turned theirs, and they rode out the way they had come. Clara let out a slow breath. She hadn't realized she'd been holding it. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No," Ethan said. "He's not." "Then what do we do?" He turned to look at her. There was something new in his expression. Not fear, nothing close to fear, but a gravity that hadn't been there before. "I'm going to ride to the county seat next week. File the water rights paperwork properly. I've been putting it off for 2 years because the fee is steep and I didn't—" He stopped. "I didn't think it mattered. For one person." Clara heard the thing inside that sentence that he hadn't said outright. She let it be. "I'll go with you," she said. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to." She set the rifle against the porch post. "I want to. 2 names on the paperwork are harder to argue with than 1. He looked at her hands, then at her face. "2 names," he repeated. "If that's all right." A pause, long enough to be a decision rather than a hesitation. "That's all right," he said. The strangers arrived 4 days later, just before dark. Clara heard the horse first, just one, moving erratically, the stumbling gait of an animal near its limit. She was in the yard, and she saw it come over the rise, alone, no rider. And then she saw the rider, a man, draped over the horse's neck, barely holding. He was gripping the mane with both hands, and his back was soaked through dark. She was running before she'd made the decision to run. "Ethan!" she called behind her, already moving. The horse stopped at the fence line, too tired to go further. Clara reached it and caught the bridle, and the man nearly fell. She got a shoulder under his arm on instinct and took his weight, staggering but holding, until Ethan was there and they had him between them. He was young, maybe 20. His face was white under 3 days of dust, and something on his left side had bled through his shirt and dried and bled again. "Easy," Clara said. "We've got you." The young man's eyes found her face. He grabbed her wrist with a grip that was stronger than he should have had. "They're behind me," he rasped. Don't let them—" Then he went completely limp. They carried him inside. Clara had the wound uncovered and assessed in under 2 minutes. A knife cut along the ribs. Deep enough to be serious. Not deep enough to be immediately fatal if they handled it right. She sent Ethan for boiled water and the medical kit without having to explain herself. "You've done this before," Ethan said when he came back with the kit. "Cattle country upbringing," she said, not looking up from her work. "You learn." The young man's name was Jesse. They got that much from him when he surfaced briefly while Clara was stitching. He said it without being asked, like he needed them to know there was a name to him. "Jesse what?" Clara asked. "Pruitt." A pause, a long, careful breath. "Jesse Pruitt from Abilene." "What happened to you, Jesse Pruitt from Abilene?" His eyes went to the window. "Are the doors locked?" Ethan moved to the front door without a word. Clara heard the bolt. Jesse looked at the ceiling. "I worked for Crowley. 3 months. I didn't know what I was getting into. I thought it was ranch work." He swallowed. "When I found out what they were really running, I tried to leave. They don't let you leave." The kitchen went very quiet. "He's coming for me," Jesse said. "Crowley. He'll send Vance." His eyes went to Ethan. "I need to get to the county sheriff. I have papers, documents, things I took when I ran." He tried to move, and Clara put a firm hand on his shoulder, and he stopped. "My saddlebag. I need my saddlebag." "I'll get it," Ethan said, already at the door. Jesse grabbed Clara's wrist again. "You shouldn't have brought me in," he said. "They'll come here." "You'd have bled out in that saddle by midnight," Clara said. "Yes, ma'am." His grip loosened slightly. "I know. I'm telling you what it's going to cost you." "Let us worry about what it costs," Clara said. "You rest." Ethan came back with the saddlebag and something else. He set both on the table. The something else was a small bundle wrapped in what had once been a shirt. "It was tied under the bag," he said. He was looking at the bundle with an expression that was hard to read. "Inside the roll." Jesse's head turned on the pillow. "Don't open that," he said, and his voice had changed completely. All the pale exhaustion suddenly replaced by something urgent and awake. "That goes to the sheriff. Nobody opens that." "What's in it?" Ethan asked. "Evidence." Jesse's jaw set. "Everything Crowley doesn't want the county to know. Land deeds, forged titles, names of men he's paid." He paused. "And the deed to your south boundary land. The original. In your grandfather's name. Crowley's been claiming it's unclaimed territory, but it isn't. It never was. It's yours. It's been yours for 30 years. He's been forging the county records." Ethan went very still. Clara looked at him. She watched the thing move through his face. Shock first, then a cold and settling fury. Then something else that was harder to name. A kind of grief for all the years he'd spent on a piece of land without knowing what was being done to it behind his back. "How long has he been working this?" Ethan said. "At least 5 years," Jesse said. "Maybe longer. He picks isolated men. People who don't have lawyers. Don't have—" He glanced at Clara. "Don't have anyone checking." The word isolated hung in the air. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked back. "We need to get him to the county seat," she said. "He can't ride," Ethan said. "Not tonight. But in 2 days, if that wound doesn't turn, he can sit in a wagon." She looked at Jesse. "Can you manage 2 days?" "I can manage 2 days," Jesse said. "The question is whether Crowley's men let you have them." They did not. Vance came back that same night. Clara heard the horses at 10:30. More this time, She could tell by the layered sound of hooves, and she was up and had a hand on Ethan's door before the knock was halfway down. He was already awake. "How many?" he said. "6, maybe 7. He was on his feet, dressed, rifle in hand. Clara already had hers. "Jesse stays down," Ethan said, "no matter what. He stays in that room with the door shut." "Understood." "Clara." He stopped. He looked at her in the dim light of the hallway, and there was something in his face that he was holding back with visible effort. "If something goes wrong, nothing's going to go wrong," she said. "But if it does, Ethan," she put her hand flat on his arm, just for a moment, just enough to interrupt the fear before it could speak itself into existence. "I've been standing here for 3 months. I'm not going anywhere." His jaw worked. Then he nodded once. They went to the door together.
Vance called from the yard. "Carter, we know you've got Jesse Pruitt. Send him out and we ride. That's the whole of it."
"Pruitt needed medical care," Ethan said through the door. "He got it. Now he stays until he can travel. He travels now, or he doesn't travel at all. That a threat, Vance?" A pause. "Mr. Crowley wants what the boy took from him. You hand it over, and the boy can keep breathing. That's a mercy offer, Carter." Clara pressed her back to the wall beside the front window. She could see shapes in the yard. Not 7, she'd been right. Definitely 6. Vance at the front. The others spread in a loose half circle. "There's too many," she said quietly to Ethan. "I know. If they come in, they won't rush the house. Too many angles." He was calculating. She could see it. "They want to scare us into opening the door. Is it working?" He looked at her. A very short, very direct look. "No." "Carter." Vance's voice had lost its patience. "Last offer." "My answer's the same as it was this morning," Ethan said. "Get off my land." Silence. Long enough for Clara's heart to find a very fast, very loud rhythm. Then a shot. It took out the window glass directly above Clara's head, and she dropped to a crouch on pure reflex. And everything after that happened very fast. Ethan returned fire through the broken window. Clara moved to the side door, kicked it open, came out low on the porch's blind side. 2 of the riders had come around to flank the house. She could see them plain in the moonlight. And she raised the rifle and fired over their heads, not to hit, to redirect. And it worked. They pulled back, horses shying hard. Ethan's voice from inside. "Clara, get back in!" "I'm fine," she said. Another shot from the yard. She heard it hit the house frame. She fired again, this time lower, and she heard a man shout and heard a horse wheel away. Then silence. Real silence. The kind that follows when the decision gets made. Vance's voice came again. Different now. Tighter. Less arranged. "Crowley will come himself. You understand that? You've just made sure of it." "Tell him we'll be ready," Clara said. A very long pause. Then the horses turned and left. Clara sat down on the porch step because her legs decided it was time. Her hands were shaking in the way they'd shaken after the cattle run. Adrenaline burning off, the body reclaiming itself. She pressed them flat against her thighs and breathed. Ethan came around the side of the house. He stopped when he saw her sitting there, and she saw the full weight of his relief cross his face unguarded for just a moment before he got it under control. "You hit one of them," he said. "Winged one. He'll live." "Clara, I told you I was my father's daughter." He sat down on the step beside her, not touching, but close. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the night air. "You told Vance we'd be ready," he said. "We will be." "Crowley is not like Vance. He's not—" He stopped, started again. "He doesn't come himself, unless he means to finish it." "I know. I need you to understand what that means." "Ethan." Clara turned to look at him directly. I grew up in cattle country. I buried a husband. I got sent 30 miles out of town to live with a stranger because the people who were supposed to love me decided I was a problem to be solved. She held his gaze. I know what hard things look like. I'm not frightened of Caleb Crowley. He looked at her for a long time. The moonlight was stark and honest, and the yard around them was quiet and scattered with the evidence of what had just happened. I am, he said quietly. Not for myself. The admission landed between them without ceremony. Clara understood its weight. She understood what it cost a man like him to say that plainly. She turned back to look at the yard. Then we make sure he has nothing to come for, she said. Jesse and those documents get to the county seat. If the sheriff has that evidence, Crowley has no play. He can't move against us without exposing himself. We can't get Jesse to the county seat with Crowley's men watching every road. No. Clara was quiet for a moment. But we know someone who can get word through. She looked at him. Sully. Ethan stared at her. Sully's a freight driver. Sully drives freight between here and the county seat twice a week. He doesn't ask questions. He minds his own road. She paused. He told me you weren't a bad sort when he dropped me off. That means he has an opinion of you. Men who have opinions can be asked. Something changed in Ethan's face. He stood up. He reached a hand down to her. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet, and he didn't let go immediately, just held her hand for 1 moment. 2. In the dark of the porch, with the night air moving warm over both of them, and the broken glass on the floor inside, and Jesse asleep in the back room, with his evidence and his terrible knowledge. All right, Ethan said. His voice was very low. We send for Sully in the morning. Clara looked at their joined hands, and then at his face, and she understood, with the particular clarity that comes at moments of real danger, when everything unnecessary falls away, that something had happened between them that could not be undone. Not a decision, something earlier than a decision, the kind of thing that is already true before you name it. She did not name it. There was too much ahead of them still, too much that could go wrong, too much that Crowley hadn't yet done, too much night still between them and morning. But she held onto his hand for that 1 moment before letting go. And Ethan Carter, a man who had stopped reaching for things 3 years ago, did not pull away. Inside the back room, in the dark, Jesse Pruitt slept with the saddlebag pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat. And none of them heard, in the far distance, the sound of a rider approaching, not from the direction of the road, but from the north, riding fast, carrying something. The rider from the north was a woman. Clara saw that first, before anything else, because the way a person sits a horse at speed is different depending on who they are. And this rider was leaning forward with a particular urgency of someone who has come a long way fast and is not yet sure they've come far enough. She pulled up hard in the yard, and the horse skidded on the dry ground, and she was off before it fully stopped, one hand gripping the saddle horn to catch herself, the other pressed to her stomach. That was when Clara saw the rest of it. The woman was young, younger than Clara, barely 20, with dark hair falling loose from a braid that had given up somewhere on the road. She was wearing a man's coat over a dress that had seen better weeks. Her face was white with exhaustion, and something deeper than exhaustion. And she was very, very pregnant. "Help me," she said, and her voice broke on both words. "Please. I've been riding since yesterday morning. I didn't know where else." She stopped. Her knees buckled. Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. Clara was already moving. "Get her inside," Clara said. She had a hand on the woman's face in 2 seconds, checking temperature, checking the color of her lips, reading what the body was saying. The body was saying several alarming things at once. She's running a fever." "I'm all right," the woman said, which was not true, and all three of them knew it. "What's your name?" Clara asked.
"May."
A breath.
"May Pruitt."
Ethan and Clara looked at each other over her head.
"Jesse's sister," Clara said. May's eyes, which had been sliding toward closing, snapped back open. "You know Jesse? Is he alive? I've been looking." She grabbed Clara's wrist with both hands. "Please tell me he's alive." "He's alive," Clara said. "He's in the back room. He's hurt, but he's going to be fine." May Pruitt made a sound that Clara would remember for the rest of her life. Something between a sob and a laugh. The specific sound of a person who has been carrying the weight of the worst possible thing for days and just had it lifted, all at once, without warning. She covered her face with both hands, and her whole body shook with it. "Easy," Clara said. "Easy now. We've got you." They got her inside. Jesse, who had been awake since the sound of the horse, was already calling from the back room. Clara heard his voice go from cautious to disbelieving to something raw and undone as his sister's voice answered him through the wall. When she opened the door between them, Jesse sat up too fast, and Clara had to step in and push him back down before he tore his stitching open. "Sit down," she said firmly. "That's May. I know who it is. Sit down, Jesse. I mean it." He sat. May went to him, and they grabbed each other's hands across the bed and started talking at the same time, in the rushed, overlapping way of siblings who have been separated and frightened, both of them trying to tell their story and hear the others simultaneously. Clara left them to it. She went to the kitchen where Ethan was standing by the window, watching the road north. "Crowley's men will have seen which direction she came from," he said without turning around. "Yes. They'll know there's a connection. They'll come faster now." Yes. Clara was already calculating. "We can't wait 2 days for Jesse. We can't wait for Sully either. We need to move tonight." Ethan turned. "May can't travel. Not like that." "May can't ride, but she can sit in a wagon." Clara kept her voice steady. "We load them both tonight. You drive them to the county seat. I stay here." "No." "Ethan, no." His voice left no room. "I'm not leaving you here alone with Crowley's men watching this property." "One of us has to go with them. Jesse can't drive in his condition, and May is—" She stopped, recalculated. "How far is Harmon's place?" 8 miles north. "And Harmon has men?" 2 ranch hands. His son. Ethan was following the logic. "If I ride to Harmon tonight, you could be back before dawn with 3 more people," Clara said. "Crowley won't move on the house with 5 defenders. He's ruthless, not stupid." "That leaves you alone for 2 hours. The doors bolt from inside. I have the rifle and enough ammunition to make anyone's approach very unpleasant." She met his eyes. "I'll be fine." He looked at her for a long time. She could see the argument assembling itself in him and disbanding again because he kept running up against the same problem, which was that she was right. 2 hours, he said. "I ride hard both ways. You don't open the door for anyone." "I know how bolts work." "Clara." He stepped closer. Close enough that she had to look up to hold his gaze. "If you hear riders before I'm back, any riders, you go to the root cellar. Take the rifle. Don't come up until you hear my voice." "All right." "Promise me." She held his gaze. "I promise." Something moved through his face. Not satisfaction, not quite. The look of a man who is doing the thing that makes the most sense, while knowing that making sense doesn't protect the people you can't afford to lose. "I'll be back before the moon moves 2 hand widths," he said. Then he was gone, and the sound of his horse faded north, and Clara was alone in the kitchen with the lamplight and the bolt on the door and everything that needed doing before dawn. She checked on May first. Jesse had gone quiet. He was holding his sister's hand, and she had fallen half asleep against the wall beside his bed, her breathing heavy and uneven in the way of someone who has pushed themselves far past their natural limit. Clara felt her forehead again. The fever was real, but not yet dangerous. She got water into her and a compress on her neck and covered her with a quilt from the chest at the foot of the bed.
She rode 2 days to find me, Jesse said quietly.
He was watching his sister with the expression of a man being simultaneously broken and rebuilt by something he hadn't expected.
She found you, Clara said. Crowley sent men to Abilene, to the house.
His jaw tightened.
She ran when she saw them coming. She didn't have anywhere else to go except...
He stopped.
She didn't even know I was here. She was just riding away from them.
And she ended up here.
Yes, ma'am.
Clara looked at May's sleeping face. Something was working at her quietly. Some feeling she couldn't quite name, connected to the gentle rise and fall of that sleeping woman's middle, to the child that was very close now by the look of it, to the particular vulnerability of a person who had run as far as they could run and arrived at a stranger's house because there was nowhere else. She knew that feeling. She had arrived at a stranger's house herself. "Rest," she told Jesse. "We're going to move you both tonight. Can you manage a wagon?"
"I can manage."
"Good." She straightened up. "The documents are still in your bag?"
"They don't leave my person."
"Good," she said again. She went back to the kitchen. She made coffee she didn't intend to drink, because the ritual of making it was something to do with her hands while her mind worked. She checked the bolt on the front door and the side door. She checked the window latches. She went to the porch once, listened, came back in. The night was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. 45 minutes passed. Then she heard the horses. Not from the road, from the east. She was across the kitchen and had the lamp out before the sound fully registered, moving in the dark toward the front window, because darkness was protection now. She could hear them. 4 horses, maybe 5, coming through the pasture rather than the road, which meant they knew the road would be visible, and they had decided not to be visible. Her heart was going hard but steady. She picked up the rifle. She thought about the root cellar. She thought about her promise to Ethan. Then she heard May cry out from the back room. Not fear, something else, something more fundamental than fear. And she understood immediately what that sound meant. The timing was catastrophic, and also, Clara thought with a strange, cold clarity, entirely inevitable. She went to the back room. Jesse was already sitting up, white-faced, reaching for his sister's hand.
"The baby's coming,"
May said. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were focused.
"It started an hour ago."
"I didn't. I was trying not to." "How far apart?" Clara asked.
"I don't know. I've never—" She grabbed the bed frame as something moved through her, and her knuckles went white. Clara counted under her breath, looked at Jesse. "This is happening now." "I heard horses," Jesse said. "I know." "Crowley's men—" "I know, Jesse." Clara set the rifle against the wall within reach and knelt beside May and took her hand. Her mind was doing 2 things simultaneously, working the problem of the riders outside and the problem of the birth inside. And it was managing both with a focus that surprised her even as she was doing it. "May, look at me. This is going to be fine. I've helped with births before. You're going to do exactly what I tell you, and it's going to be fine." May looked at her with the enormous, exhausted trust of a woman who has used up all her other options. "All right," she said. All right. Then the front door shook. Not a knock, a fist, hard and deliberate. "Carter!" A voice she didn't recognize. Deeper than Vance. More certain. "We know you're in there. We know the girl is in there too. Open the door and this ends clean." Jesse's hand went for the saddlebag. "Don't move," Clara said to him, quiet and absolute. She squeezed May's hand once. "Don't either of you move, and don't make a sound." She picked up the rifle and walked to the front door. "Ethan Carter isn't here," she said through the door, loud enough to carry. A pause. "Who are you?" "Clara Carter." The name came out of her mouth before she had decided on it, and she felt the truth of it settle over her like something that had been waiting to be said. "This is my home, and I'm telling you that my husband isn't here, and you are trespassing on private property, and if you don't remove yourselves right now, I'm going to start making that rifle-shaped hole in this door." Another pause. She could hear them talking, low and fast, just below the range of understanding. "We want Jesse Pruitt," the voice came back. "He has property belonging to Mr. Crowley. You hand him over, and his property with him, and we leave without incident." "Jesse Pruitt is a guest in my home, and he's staying that way." Clara kept her back against the wall beside the door, not in front of it. "You want to argue property rights? Come back with the county sheriff. You come through that door without him, you'll wish you hadn't." A long silence, then a different voice, lower, quieter. The voice of a man who is accustomed to being the last word on any subject. "Mrs. Carter." Clara's grip on the rifle tightened. "My name is Caleb Crowley." The voice was educated, deliberate, the voice of a man who had learned that patience was more frightening than anger. "I want you to understand that I hold no personal grievance against you or your husband. I'm a businessman with a business problem. The young man in your house took documents that belong to me. I'd like them returned. That's the entirety of this." "Then you should have kept better control of your documents," Clara said. A very short silence. Then, "I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'm going to answer the same way I answered the first time." From the back room, very faint, Clara heard May make a sound she was trying to suppress. She pressed her teeth together and kept her face toward the door. "You're a brave woman," Crowley said. "Foolish, but brave. I'm giving you 1 minute." Clara calculated. Ethan had been gone over an hour. He could be on his way back. He could be 15 minutes out. He could be 5. She needed to buy time without giving Crowley a reason to come through the door before Ethan arrived. "Mr. Crowley," she said, "I'll make you a counter offer." A pause. He was listening. "Those documents go to the county sheriff, regardless of what happens here tonight. Jesse Pruitt has already made arrangements. You can't stop that by taking him. The only thing you can do by coming through that door is add assault and murder to the charges that are already waiting for you at the county seat." She kept her voice even and measured. "Or you can ride away tonight and have the option of disappearing before the sheriff acts. That window is closing, but it's still open." Silence. Clara counted her own heartbeats, got to 11. "You're bluffing," Crowley said. "Try me," Clara said. 14. 15. Then she heard it. Horses from the north. Fast. More than one. The particular sound of men riding with purpose and not bothering to be quiet about it. Ethan's voice carried across the dark yard like a crack of thunder. "Crowley, get your men off my land!" More voices. Harmon's voice. His son. The ranch hands. 4 men at least, and they'd come in from the north road where Crowley's men couldn't see them until they were already there. Clara heard the shift in the yard, the sound of horses moving, the sound of a situation recalculating itself. Crowley's men had come prepared for a lone woman. They had not come prepared for 5 armed men arriving from a direction they hadn't covered. "This isn't over, Carter," Crowley said, and his voice had changed. Still controlled, but compressed. The voice of a man filing something away rather than abandoning it. "No," Ethan said, "but tonight it is." The sound of retreating horses. Clara stood at the door with her hand on the bolt and her forehead pressed against the wood and her eyes closed, and she counted to 10 slowly before she let herself breathe normally. Then May cried out from the back room, louder now, and Clara was already turning. "Ethan!" she called. The door opened and he was there, reading her face in a single second, already following her toward the back of the house. He saw May. He saw the situation. He looked at Clara. "What do you need?" he asked.
Hot water, more light, and stay with Jesse. Keep him from pulling his stitches out trying to help." Ethan looked at Jesse, who was pale and rigid with helplessness, in the way of men who cannot fix what's happening by working harder or hitting something. He put a hand on the younger man's shoulder and said, low and steady, "She's in good hands, the best hands. Trust her." Jesse looked at Clara. Something in what Ethan had just said moved across his face. "Yes, sir," he said quietly, and sat back. The baby came at 4 in the morning. It was a boy. He arrived loud and certain, announcing himself to the house and everyone in it, with the particular outrage of something new that has just discovered the world as cold and bright and full of air. May laughed through her crying. Jesse grabbed his sister's hand and made a sound he would probably never admit to. Old Harmon, who had stayed posted at the front window with his rifle while everything else happened, took off his hat. Ethan stood in the doorway of the back room. Clara was kneeling with the baby wrapped in the cleanest cloth she had, holding him the way her hands remembered holding things that needed to be held carefully. She looked up and found Ethan watching her, and the expression on his face was something she had not seen from him before. Open in a way he usually kept closed. Something between grief and wonder, and the particular tenderness of a man who has loved children and lost them, and thought himself done with that part of life. She stood and crossed to him, and held the baby out. He stared at her for a moment. "Go on," she said quietly. He took the baby with the careful, practiced sureness of a man who had done this before, years ago, in another life. The baby fit against his arm like it had been placed there. His face did something she couldn't quite describe. Too many things at once, all of them true. "He's all right?" Ethan said. "He's perfect," Clara said. Ethan looked down at the baby. The baby looked up at the approximate location of Ethan's face, with the unfocused, absolute concentration of the newborn. And Ethan Carter, who had been a man defined by what he'd lost, stood there in the lamplight and held a new life in his arms, and said nothing, because there was nothing that words were built for in a moment like that. Clara watched him. She thought about 3 months ago, stepping off a freight wagon in a yard she'd never seen, carrying the single suitcase that held everything her life had been reduced to. She thought about wildflowers in a cracked clay mug. She thought about stitching a fence in the dark. She thought about her own name coming out of her mouth at a bolted door. Clara Carter, with the certainty of something she'd already known. She thought about the child she had lost, early and quiet, in a life that felt very far away now. She thought about this one. May's voice came from the bed, rough with exhaustion and something luminous underneath it. "What do I call him?" Clara looked at her. May was looking back, not at Jesse, not at Ethan, at Clara, as if the answer was hers to give. Clara looked at Ethan. Ethan looked up from the baby. His jaw worked once. Then he said, very quietly,
Daniel was a good name.
The room was still for a moment. May said,
Then Daniel it is.
Clara turned away toward the window before anyone could see her face. The eastern sky had started to go from black to the deep blue that comes just before the gray, and the ranch outside was quiet in a way that was no longer ominous, but simply early, simply the world resting before it began again. Behind her, she heard Jesse say, "We need to get those papers to the sheriff. First light." "First light," Ethan agreed. "Crowley won't wait long." "No," Ethan said, "but he'll wait until morning. He's not a man who moves in the open without planning it first. We've got a few hours." "You sound certain," Jesse said. "I'm not," Ethan said honestly, "but I'm choosing to be." Clara almost smiled at the window. She heard that. She recognized it. It was the same choice she had made every morning for 3 years. The choice to be certain when certainty wasn't available. To keep moving when staying still felt safer. To hold on when everything around you was suggesting you let go. She turned back to the room.
"Sleep," she said to May. "All of you. I'll watch until first light."
"Clara," Ethan started.
"You rode 8 miles and back and held off Crowley's men and delivered the most important news of that boy's life," she said. "Sleep."
He looked at her. The baby was back in May's arms now, and Ethan's were empty. But something in his face had changed permanently in the last half hour, and they both knew it. "Wake me in 2 hours," he said.
"I will."
He held her gaze for 1 moment longer than was necessary. Then he went to the chair by the back wall and folded himself into it, and was asleep in under 3 minutes. The way working people sleep when they finally allow themselves. Completely, without reservation. Clara sat in the doorway, with the rifle across her knees, and listened to the house breathe. May asleep with her son. Jesse, with his eyes closed and one hand on his saddlebag. Harmon's son at the front window. Harmon himself dozing at the kitchen table. And Ethan in the corner chair with his arms folded and his face finally quiet, finally still. The lines of it softer in sleep than she'd ever seen them. She watched him for longer than she meant to. Then she turned her eyes back to the door and the dark beyond it, and the pale line that was beginning very slowly to separate the earth from the sky. Whatever was coming next was still coming. But right now, in this room, everyone she cared about was alive and breathing and safe. That was enough for tonight. That was more than enough. She was still watching when the sky turned gray and then gold, and the first real light of morning came through the window and laid itself across the floor like a quiet promise. Ethan was awake before Clara had to wake him. She heard him move in the chair and looked over and found him already sitting forward with his elbows on his knees, watching her with the clear eyes of a man who had not wasted his sleep, but used it fully and was now done with it. He looked at the light coming through the window and then at her face, and he read both without asking a single question. "How long?" he said. 20 minutes until full light." She stood up from the doorway, working the stiffness out of her back without making a production of it. "Harmon's boy is still at the front window. No movement on the road. Crowley's regrouping." Ethan was already on his feet. He lost the advantage of surprise, and he knows it. He'll be working out a new approach. "Which means we have a window." "Narrow one." He looked past her into the back room. May was asleep with the baby on her chest. Jesse was awake, eyes open, watching the ceiling with the look of a man doing calculations. "Is he fit to travel?" "He'll say yes, regardless of what his body says," Clara told him. "But I think he can manage the wagon. The wound is clean. If we keep it wrapped tight, and the road isn't too rough, he won't tear it open."
Road to the county seat is rough in 3 places, Ethan thought for a moment. We go north to Harmon's first. Leave May and the baby there. She can't travel that road. She won't want to be separated from Jesse. No, but she'll understand. He looked at Clara. You're coming. It wasn't a question. She had noticed he'd stopped asking her things as questions, when the answers were things he'd already decided he needed. I'm coming, she said. Jesse was harder to convince about May than they'd expected. He sat on the edge of the bed with his jaw set and his hand on his sister's, and he said, flat and immovable, She stays with me. Jesse, Clara kept her voice even. That baby is 12 hours old. May has a fever that hasn't broken. The road to the county seat will take 3 hours in a wagon on the best day, and today is not the best day. She looked at him directly. You want to protect her. The way to protect her is to leave her somewhere safe with people who can care for her while you finish what you started. Jesse looked at his sister. May was awake now, listening, with the baby tucked against her and her face tired and clear. Go, May said. May? Jesse. Her voice was quiet, but it had the same quality his did when he meant something finally. You rode for 3 months with those documents. You got cut and you kept going. You rode 2 days injured to find the right person. She shifted the baby slightly. Don't stop now, not when you're this close. Jesse looked at his nephew. The baby had his fist pressed against his own cheek and was sleeping with the total commitment of the newly born. I'll come back for you, Jesse said. I know you will. May almost smiled. You always do. He looked at Clara then, and what was in his face was the particular trust that forms between people who have been endangered together. Unearned by ordinary measures, but absolutely real. You'll be with him the whole way? The whole way, Clara said. He nodded. One short, decided nod. All right. They were moving before the sun was fully up. Harmon rode ahead to clear the path to his own property and send his son back to watch the Carter ranch. Ethan drove the wagon with Jesse in the bed and Clara on the seat beside him and the saddlebag between Jesse's hands, like it was the most important thing in the world, which in the ways that mattered most, it was. May stood in the doorway of the Carter house as they pulled out of the yard, holding Daniel against her chest with both arms, and she watched them go with the expression of a woman who has decided to trust something bigger than her fear. Clara watched her until the ridge took her from sight. She'll be all right, Ethan said quietly, without taking his eyes off the road. I know she will, Clara said. They rode in silence for a while. The morning was cool the way summer mornings are cool only in the first hour before the heat remembers itself. And the grass on both sides of the road was still dark with dew, and there was a quality to the light that Clara associated with new beginnings, which she understood was her own sentiment and not the light's, but she allowed it. You called yourself Clara Carter, Ethan said. He said it the way he said most things, plainly, without ornamentation, just setting the fact in the open air between them, where they could both look at it. Clara kept her eyes on the road ahead. Her heart had picked up its pace slightly. I did, she said, at the door, when Crowley's men came. A pause. You said, my name is Clara Carter. This is my home. I remember. You want to tell me about that? She turned to look at him. He was looking at the horses, giving her the option of his profile rather than his full attention, which she had learned was the way he gave people room when room was what they needed. I think I said it because it was true, she said. Or because I wanted it to be. He was quiet for long enough that the wagon covered another 50 yards of road. I think it could be, he said, if you wanted. Clara looked at her hands. 3 months ago, she had sat on a freight wagon with a single suitcase and the specific dignity of a woman who has nothing left to perform for anyone. She had been sent away like a letter nobody wanted to receive. She had arrived at a stranger's house and found a man who was also a stranger to himself, moving through the life he'd survived without much sense of why. And now, here they were. On a road in the early summer light, with a young man and his saddlebag full of evidence, and a story that was not finished, but had turned, somewhere in the last 3 months, into something neither of them had planned.
"I think so too,"
she said quietly. Ethan's hands shifted on the reins. It was not a large movement, but she saw it. "I'm not," he started. Stopped. Tried again. "I'm not a man who says things easily."
"I know."
"But I want to say this right." He finally looked at her, straight on, the way he did when he was done managing things sideways. "You're the best thing that's come to that ranch in a long time. Maybe ever. And I'd like you to stay. Not as an arrangement." He held her gaze. "As my wife. As the real thing. If that's something you'd choose, knowing everything you know." Clara looked at him, at the tiredness in his face and the steadiness behind it, at the man who had put wildflowers on a kitchen table before dawn and said nothing about it, who had held her hand in the dark outside a house full of danger and not let go until she did, who had taken a baby in his arms in the middle of the night and said a name out loud that had cost him something real. "Yes," she said. Just that. He didn't need it dressed in more words than that, and neither did she. Ethan looked back at the road, but the line of his jaw had changed, and something in the set of his shoulders had changed, and she felt the change in him, the way you feel a held breath released. From the wagon bed, Jesse's voice came, rough and careful. "I ain't listening." "Yes, you are," Ethan said. "Not a word of it," Jesse said. Clara laughed. It came out of her completely without permission, real and sudden and full. The kind of laugh that surprises you because you'd forgotten you were capable of it. She felt Ethan's arm brush hers as the wagon hit a rut, and neither of them moved away. They hit trouble at the second creek crossing. 2 riders, waiting. Not Vance. Not anyone Ethan named out loud. But the way they were positioned, one on each bank, blocking the narrow ford, said everything about who had sent them. Ethan pulled the wagon up short. "Stay," he said to Clara. Not commanding, asking. "Ethan!" 30 seconds. He was already climbing down. He walked toward the riders at the pace of a man who has decided on something and is giving the other party the chance to reconsider. His rifle was in his hand, held low, visible without being raised. "You're blocking a public crossing," he said. The nearer rider said, "Mr. Crowley sends his regards. Says you've had time to reconsider." "Mr. Crowley is going to need a good lawyer before the week is out," Ethan said. "Tell him the regards aren't appreciated and the crossing is needed. We've got instructions, and I've got a rifle and 20 years of patience, and not a great deal of either left this morning." Ethan's voice hadn't raised. It had done the other thing, gotten quieter and more absolute. "Move your horses." A silence. Both riders looked at each other, looked at the rifle, looked at the wagon where Clara sat straight-backed on the seat, and Jesse had appeared from the wagon bed, holding his own rifle, with the careful posture of a man managing a wound and a weapon simultaneously. The nearer rider pulled his horse left. The farther one followed. Ethan walked back to the wagon, climbed up, clicked the horses forward. They crossed the creek without incident. Clara watched both riders until the bend in the road took them from view. "That's twice today someone's backed down," Jesse said from the back. "They're not backing down," Ethan said. "They're reporting back. Crowley wants to know what road we're taking." "Then he knows we're going to the sheriff." "He's known since last night."
You think he'll try to get ahead of us?
I think he'll try to intercept the sheriff first.
Ethan pressed the horses into a faster trot. Which is why we're not going to the county sheriff. Clara looked at him. There's a federal marshal stationed in Caldwell, Ethan said. Takes half a day longer by road. But federal jurisdiction means Crowley can't pressure the local office first. Jessie was quiet for a moment. That's smarter. I've been thinking about it since last night. Ethan glanced at Clara. I should have said earlier.
You were busy earlier, she said.
The twist came at the Harmon Road Junction, 2 miles before the Caldwell Fork. A rider was waiting there, alone. And when Clara saw who it was, her hands went very still in her lap. Thomas. Her brother sat his horse in the middle of the road junction, with his hat in his hands, and his expression, the specific expression, of a man who has done something he cannot undo and knows it. He looked older than she remembered, or maybe she was just seeing him differently now, from a different height. Ethan slowed the wagon. Thomas's eyes went to Clara, then to Ethan, then back to Clara. I heard there was trouble at the Carter Ranch, Thomas said. Harmon sent word into town this morning. I rode out. A pause. I wanted to make sure I needed to know you were all right. Clara looked at her brother for a long moment. I'm all right, she said. Thomas swallowed. His hands worked his hat brim. Clara, I know what I did. Sending you out there the way I did. The way I talked about it. The way I let people talk. He stopped. Started again. I told myself it was practical, that I was helping. You told yourself a lot of things, Clara said. Her voice was even, not cold, just honest. I know it. He met her eyes. I'm not here to ask you to forgive me. I'm here because you're my sister, and I spent the last 2 weeks not sleeping and finally had the decency to be honest with myself about why. He looked at Ethan. Carter, my sister, he seemed to be trying to find a word that was big enough. I should have done better by her. I'm sorry to you for that, as much as to her. Ethan looked at Thomas for a long moment. Clara felt him make a decision the way she had learned to feel him make decisions. Quietly, without announcement. She's been doing pretty well without much help from either of us, Ethan said. Thomas looked at Clara. Something in his face broke open slightly. I can see that. Thomas, Clara finally spoke. I'm not ready to have the conversation. Not today. Today we have something that needs doing, and it needs doing before Caleb Crowley decides to remove his evidence by removing Jessie. She held her brother's gaze. But I want you to ride back to Red Hollow. I want you to tell the Reverend and Margaret Hale and everyone else who's been talking that Clara Carter sends her regards and she's doing fine. She paused. Can you do that? Thomas stared at her. At her name, said that way, with that certainty. He looked at Ethan. Back at her. Yes, he said. I can do that. Good. She nodded at the road. Go home, Thomas. He put his hat back on. He looked at her one more time, and what was in his face was something she decided to let herself see rather than turn away from. Genuine, undefended regret. The kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. Then he turned his horse and rode back the way he had come. Ethan clicked the horses forward without comment. Jessie's voice came from the back, gentle and deliberate. Still not listening. Neither Clara nor Ethan said a word. But this time she felt the warmth of him close on the seat beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and she let herself lean into it the smallest degree, and he let her. The federal marshal's name was Harding. He was a compact, gray-eyed man with the manner of someone who has heard a great many things and stopped being surprised by any of them a long time ago. He received Jesse Pruitt's saddlebag at his desk, undid the bundle with methodical hands, spread the documents in front of him, and read in silence for 4 minutes. Then he looked up. "How long have you been carrying these?" he asked Jesse.
3 months, sir, since I ran.
"And Crowley's been active in this county? How long?"
At least 5 years. The land records go back further."
Harding looked at the documents again. He picked up one page, Clara couldn't see which, and read a section of it twice. He set it down. "I'm going to need your testimony," he said to Jesse. "Written and in person."
"Yes, sir. Whatever you need."
Harding looked at Ethan. "The deeds to your south boundary, these are yours, the originals."
We'll need to file corrections with the county land office, but that's administrative. It's not in question.
He paused. "I'm sorry this sat undiscovered this long. That kind of thing doesn't happen without help from somewhere inside the local system."
"I know," Ethan said. "I'm going to need a few days to move on Crowley properly. Do you have somewhere secure to stay in the meantime?"
"The Carter Ranch," Clara said.
Harding looked at her, then at Ethan. Something in the way she'd said it settled the question without further discussion. "All right," Harding said. He looked at Jesse. "You're staying where I can reach you?"
"Yes, sir,"
Jesse said. Harding stood and extended his hand to Ethan. They shook. He turned to Clara and paused, as if reconsidering his next move, and then extended his hand to her as well. She shook it. "You held that house last night," Harding said. Not a question.
"I did."
"Against how many?"
6, counting Crowley.
He looked at her with the evaluating steadiness of a man who is deciding whether to be impressed. He decided. "Good work, Mrs. Carter." Clara felt the name land differently this time. Not like something she'd claimed in urgency, like something that fit.
"Thank you, Marshal,"
she said.
Caleb Crowley was arrested 11 days later.
Clara heard about it from Sully, who brought the news with the mail and a crate of dry goods and stayed for coffee, with the particular satisfaction of a man who likes to deliver good news. Harding had moved on 3 properties simultaneously and had taken Crowley at his own ranch house before dawn, along with Vance and 4 others. Tom Alderman had turned witness in exchange for a reduced charge. The land office in town had already received notice of the corrections to the county records. It was over. Sully drank his coffee and said, "Town's talkin', you know." "Town's always talkin'," Clara said. "Different kind of talkin' now." He looked at her with his straight, uncomplicated gaze. "More of the quiet kind. The kind people do when they've been proven wrong and don't quite know where to put it." Clara thought about Margaret Hale's carrying whisper.
She thought about the crowd outside the church in the summer heat, watching her leave with satisfaction. She thought about how small all of that seemed from this kitchen, in this house, with the smell of coffee and the sound of Ethan outside in the yard, and August's foal running the fence line in the early morning. "Let them be quiet," she said. Sully nodded like that was the right answer. He finished his coffee and stood and put his hat on. He looked around the kitchen, at the herbs in the window, the mended curtain, the cracked clay mug that still had a wildflower in it, because Clara had kept the habit going all summer. "Place looks different than it used to," he said. "I expect it does," Clara said. "Good different," Sully said. He picked up his hat and went. Jesse came back for May 3 weeks after the arrest. He rode in on a hired horse, with his wound healed to a scar, and the letter from Marshal Harding in his pocket, confirming his testimony had been accepted and his obligation to the case was discharged. May was on the porch when she saw him coming down the ranch road, and she stood up so fast she knocked her chair back, and by the time he reached the yard, she was already down the steps with Daniel in her arms, and the expression of a woman who has spent 3 weeks holding herself together by will alone, and has just been given permission to stop.
Clara watched from the doorway. Ethan came up behind her. Jesse held his sister for a long time. He took his nephew with the practiced awkwardness of a young man learning what to do with a baby, and Daniel looked at him with the serene evaluation of the very small, and apparently decided he was acceptable, because he didn't object.
"What are you going to do now?" Ethan asked when Jesse finally came onto the porch.
Jesse looked at his sister, at his nephew, at the document Harding had given him, the testimony certificate that was the only paper he had to his name that wasn't complicated. "Start over," he said. "Somewhere clean." "There's clean land 20 miles east of here," Ethan said. "Good grass, water access. Doesn't belong to anyone at the moment." He paused. "Harmon's been looking for a neighbor who'll work it honestly. Said so last week." Jesse stared at him. "I'm not saying it's easy," Ethan said. "Starting ground is hard. But it's yours to start." "Mr. Carter." "Ethan," Jesse looked at Clara. She could see him doing what young men do when they are given something real and unexpected, measuring whether they deserve it and finding the measure impossible. She knew that feeling from the inside. "Take it," she said simply. "Take the chance when it's offered. That's all any of us can do."
Jesse looked at his sister again. May was holding Daniel against her shoulder, listening, and her face had the particular expression of a woman who is watching something good take shape in front of her and is not going to say a word that might disturb it.
"All right," Jesse said. "All right then."
The letter from Red Hollow came in late August, 6 weeks after the arrest. Clara almost didn't open it. She turned it over twice and looked at Margaret Hale's handwriting on the outside, and set it on the table and walked away from it, and came back to it twice more before she finally opened it. It was not what she expected. It was not an apology exactly. Margaret Hale was not built for direct apology. But it was something adjacent. A careful, constructed letter full of sentences that went most of the way toward saying something honest, and then pulled back slightly before committing. A letter that said, in the language of a woman who will not quite humble herself, but can no longer entirely hold her position, that she had heard about the trouble at the Carter Ranch, and that it was a brave thing, what Clara had done, and that she hoped Clara was well. And then, in the last paragraph, in the smallest handwriting, as if the size might make it easier to have written, "We were wrong about you. I was wrong about you. I think you always knew your own worth better than we gave you credit for. I am glad you are where you are." Clara read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and set it in the drawer beside Robert's photograph and the dried stem of the first wildflower Ethan had left on the table, which she had pressed flat and kept without saying why. She didn't respond to the letter. Not that week. Maybe not ever. She hadn't decided. What she had decided, sitting in the kitchen of a ranch house that had become her home in ways that had nothing to do with arrangement and everything to do with choice, was that the opinion of Red Hollow, good or bad, was no longer the measure of anything that mattered in her life. It had been, once. For too long. She had spent too many years standing straight under the weight of what people said and thought and whispered, trying to prove something to people who had already decided what they believed. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She knew who she was. She knew what she'd built. She knew what she was worth. She heard Ethan's boots on the back step. He came in with 2 fresh eggs in each hand, and the look of a man who has just had an argument with a hen and narrowly won. And she laughed before he said a word, and he stopped in the doorway and looked at her. "What?" he said. "Nothing." She stood up and took the eggs from him. "Supper's in an hour. Go wash up." He looked at her for a moment, the way he still sometimes looked at her, with that quality of not quite believing his own luck. Then he went to wash up without argument, which was one of the things she had come to love about him.
He accepted good things when they came.
He'd had to relearn how, but he was learning. She cracked the first egg, listened to him moving around the house, heard the familiar sounds of this life, the creak of the floor, the horses in the yard, the last of the summer birds doing their evening business in the garden she'd planted and coaxed into something real. The squash had come in, 3 of them, fat and improbable, against all the odds of the soil and the heat and the late start. She'd set them on the porch rail where Ethan would see them when he came out in the morning. She hadn't said anything about them. She didn't need to. He would see them, and he would know what they meant. That stubborn was still the best kind. That things planted in difficult ground could still come up whole. That the life his wife had tried to make in this soil wasn't gone, just waiting for the right season. Some things take longer than you planned. Some things take losing everything you expected and building again from the ground up with different hands and a different understanding of what you were building toward. Clara had been sent away as a joke. She had arrived as a burden. She had become, without anyone's permission and without anyone's help, and with the particular, unbreakable stubbornness of a woman who knows what she's worth, even when nobody around her does. Something that no one in Red Hollow had ever expected her to be. Not saved, not rescued, not redeemed by someone else's mercy. Home. And when Ethan Carter came back to the kitchen that evening and sat across the table from her, and they ate supper in the warm quiet of 2 people who have chosen each other honestly and know it. There was no drama in it, no announcement, no grand resolution. Just the truth of it, settled and real, the way the best things always are. Not loud, not sudden, but solid all the way down. Outside, the summer was ending. The first cool edge was coming into the evening air. The garden was full. The south fence was straight and properly filed in the county record under the right name. And in a room at the end of the hall, the door stood open, no lock needed, no lock wanted, on a life that had been built not from what was given, but from what was chosen, day after day, in the small, honest moments that nobody was watching. That was the whole of it. That was everything.